Bit about the fairy races of the British Isles. And I use the term races to define the individual species or individual types of fairies that are over there. And there are many different types. And while most of this is about the British Isles, we also will have a chance to talk at the end about how the fairies came over with the Irish and the English and came to the U.S. and how there's many of these types of fairies around us here. All right. Now, what are the fairies is a good first question. Some people say that the fairies are members of an ancient race. When they say that at some point in history, that ancient race inhabited the earth with us, and that they went someplace else. Other people feel that they're remnants of an alien race that had landed on Earth. And other people feel that they're a race that inhabits an alternative dimension to ours, that every once in a while impinges and allows for access both ways, into the land of fairy and back out. So they're all good answers, but nobody really has a definitive answer of where the fairies come from. It's important to remember that. What we can say is, looking back in the folklore record, that the fairies have been around us for a long time and interacting. We have folklore that goes back to the 1600s and 1500s to show where people were interacting with the fairies on a regular basis. And there are still stories about people that interact with the fairies on a fairly regular basis. So let's talk a little bit about what the word means. The English word fairy, the F-A-E-R-I-E, encompasses both the realm of fairy and the individual fairies, as in you've been brushed by the fairies, for the whole race of fairies. The English terms fae and fairy, down in the third line, usually refer just to individual fairies, not to a race or a species of fairies. And then the elf term there really came into prevalence after Tolkien with Lord of the Rings. That seemed to put that term into everybody's consciousness. It's usually considered bad luck to refer directly to the fairies, or even to come out and say, well, the fairies will come and get you. They don't like to be referred to directly, so all of the countries in the British Isles have come up with their own euphemisms for them. And there are actually dozens of lists, and I've only included a few here. So in Ireland, the good folk, people of peace. In Scotland, the still folk, the silently moving. Brittany, the Corrigans, the fees. And then in Wales, the fair folk, or the fair family. Now, there are many different ways to find out about the fairies. You can go in the internet and type in the word fairy and find thousands of references. I'm not going to say that they're all very good. It just isn't true. There are some good academic sources for the fairies. A lot of work has actually been done in the folklore departments. And that's what this book that the workshop is based on comes from. It's all folklore reference, all folklore based. The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by W.Y. Evans Wentz is a great book to start. Evans Wentz went out in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and talked to the people in all the Celtic countries, all five. And he sat down with them and approached them as an ethnologist and didn't come out as disbelieving in fairies. He came out as though he knew they were real. So when he talked to the people were willing to talk to him and tell him what they've seen. A lot of the people that he interviewed were the clergymen in the small villages. And even though the church didn't believe in fairies, most of the nuns and priests did. because they talked to them and they saw them. So, as I said, normally I bring the book. I'm surprised I didn't have it in the bag. But it's a good sized book. It's about that thick. What are you doing?
Apparently there's something wrong.
Apparently.
That's a good answer.
The second one, The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies by Robert Kirk, is a free book that's available at sacredtext.com. And what it is, it's the reprint of a story from a Catholic priest in the 1500s. He had wrote this story down of his interactions with the fairies, kept it hidden, and then it was found by Robert Kirk and printed out in the early 1900s. On the resource page, there's a lot more places to go to look for it. Literally, when I started writing the book, it started out as a workshop first. Most of my books comes from workshops. But it started out, I went out and I've added more than 150 different folklore books to my ebook collection. And the nice thing about them is they're out of print books, so a lot of them are available on that sacred text site. It's a great site. And there's a lot of historical societies in England and Ireland that have their records available that you can download. So there's a lot of information available. All right, so let's talk about what areas are going to be covered. When I started doing it, I wanted to concentrate just on the British Isles. But then as I was looking at Cornwall and down in the south of England, I realized that there were so many similarities between the fairies that lived there and the fairies that lived just over the isle, or just over the channel into Brittany. So I ended up including Brittany as well. Now, I'm not going to be talking about Brittany tonight because we don't have enough time for that. But tonight I'm going to be talking about England, Ireland, Isle of Man, Scotland, and Wales. And I'm not going to have time to go into the detail that the book does. I'm just going to highlight some of the stories, usually 9 or so from each area. But I go into a lot more detail in the book. All right, so without further ado, let's go to England. And I included these maps so that we can get a basic idea of where in England they come from. And they're also in the book for the same reason, so you can see what part of England they're from. The first one we'll talk about is the Asri. In folklore, they're described as water fairies. They're similar to mermaids, but they usually live in large inland lakes instead of in the sea. We have several good descriptions of them. Some say they're as tall as humans. Other descriptions say they're only a couple feet tall. Most references say that they're very beautiful. And most observations have said that they have webbed hands, webbed feet, and green hair, even though they're pretty at face. There's an interesting observation that they were only seen at night, and it said that the touch of sunlight would kill them. There is one story, I can't remember the name off the top of my head right this second, but there was a tale, it was in Cheshire. A fisherman caught an Asri in his net, and she kept pleading for her life because she knew that if the sun touched her, she was going to die. So she was holding onto his arm and begging for her life. And eventually he did let her go and go back into the sea, but he said that his hand and arm would never get warm again. It was just cold to the touch and cold in feeling all the time. Now, the main reason that the Asri would come up to the surface is because they like to stay in the light of the moon. So a lot of times people fishing out at night would see them. Next, these are one of the nicer fairies. I said the other day that I'm going to be talking about some of the fairies that are not very nice. We'll get up to this one, and this is Black Annis. And she's from the Leicester area in Lancashire, and there was a hill, the Dane Hills, where she supposedly had a cave up near the top of the hill. And Black Annis really wasn't a nice person, because according to the legends, Black Annis would come down from the cave at night and find children that weren't in their beds and take them away. She was one of the children stealers, and there's quite a few of the fairies that were stealers of children. She said, it was said rather, that if she caught one of them out at night, she would take them to her house, the cave, skin them alive and eat them. And then she'd put their skins on the walls of her cave. It's also said that she had dug the cave out from solid rock with her bare hands, and it was called Black Annis's Bowers by the locals. For the descriptions from the locals, it said that she's an old woman, one eye, long paws, and bluish face. And one of the favorite places to sit and watch the humans, because she liked to watch for kids that wandered off way into the woods, was in the tops of large oak trees. And that led to speculation by some of the locals that she was an ancient forest goddess, and that after man had taken away the main forest and the large areas of forest, that she'd become disenchanted with humans, shall we say. And that's why she'd catch the children and eat them. It's also said that she was a shapeshifter. Some of the legends talk about her taking the shape of a big cat and prowling through the woods. And actually the legends of seeing her and tales of her proceed all the way up until the middle of the 18th century. She didn't disappear that long ago. The next one is one that I'm sure everybody here is going to be familiar with. We all know the boggart from Harry Potter. Boggarts are usually found in the northeast countries, usually Yorkshire, Lancashire. And in Lancaster today, there are many cities that are named or have boggarts in their names, such as Boggart's Clove or Boggart's Hole. As they were portrayed in Harry Potter, the boggarts are small fairies known for their behavior. They rearrange furniture, break pots, and literally be blamed for any of the noises in the night. Like the Brownies I'll be talking about next, many times they were associated with specific families and houses. And usually in those days, especially in the manor houses, even though people in the house would change, the Brownies would be there for centuries. They were usually seen as being one of the good fairies. In other words, they didn't try to hurt people or kill people, but they were mischievous and tried to annoy people.
Like cats.
Pardon?
Like cats.
Yeah. Our next one is from Harry Potter again. We have the Lorry. And the depiction of Avie in Harry Potter was really well done. We see that with the Brownies in general, they're usually very small, usually naked, or wearing shaggy brown clothes. They're very helpful and do a lot of the small chores. The big thing is you can displease them very easily by offering payment for their services. They don't want to be paid. They enjoy having cream and stuff left out for them, but you're never paying them to work. You're just giving an offering to the house fairy. And if you stop and think, or rather one way that comes down in the tales is that if you ever give clothes to the fairies, they'll leave your house. There's several instances of tales of them actually doing that. And if you look at what happened in Harry Potter, when Harry threw the sock to Avie in the book, that's exactly what was happening. He was being offered payment, so he left the service and was a free elf. Good things to leave out for them are water, milk, bread, and cheese. And it's also good sometimes to leave out whiskey for them. But again, you don't want to leave out a large amount of whiskey. A little thimbleful is good, because you really don't want a drunken brownie in there. At the end of the workshop, I'll be going through, and there's actually charms and spells to attract a brownie to your house. And I'll give that to you so you can see how it's done if you want to call one in. If you don't already have brownies, many people nowadays have brownies or house elves. And they're the ones that make the keys go away for a while and then have them reappear again. Brownies were found all over England, no one area. They were also found up into Scotland as far as the Shetlands. So they were widespread in England and in Ireland, so when I get there. The next one is one from a very specific location in Ireland, or in England. And she's another one from Yorkshire. Yorkshire Downs is a wonderful area of England. It's the Yorkshire Down National Park is the largest park in England. And it's, what do I have here? Similar area. It's about, not quite as big as Rhode Island, but it's about half the size of Rhode Island. It's a beautiful big park, all rolling hills, really nice. A lot of fairies come from that area. Churnmilk Peg is a nature fairy. She's the protector of hazelnuts and oak trees and their crops. And her main job was to prevent anybody from taking the acorns or the hazelnuts before they were ready. One of her names is the Acorn Lady. One tale tells us that if anyone ate nuts before they were ready, she would give them severe stomach cramps. It's going to happen anyways, but she was responsible for it. It's interesting that the standing stone on the right is in the town of Midgley, near Hadrian's Wall, and this is called Churnmilk Peg. So this was named after her. Next we have another one from Harry Potter, Hobgoblins. Everybody likes hobgoblins. It's thought by folklorists that the term hobgoblin is actually derived from Robin Goodfellow. Robin Goodfellow is an early name in English history. And he was a fairy that people would run into. Some people that say that the story of Robin Hood is actually derived from the hobgoblin Robin Goodfellow. This picture is from Spiderwick Chronicles, and it's a really cool children's series that shows about that. You'll find hobgoblins in a lot of the modern fantasy literature and in many of the role-playing games. Now, it's interesting that when you look at the actual folklore, the hobgoblin's job was to sit in the house and protect it and take care of it during the night. And what he would do is he'd sit in a place that was always warm and dry. And he actually has a place in the back of a fireplace called the hob, and that's where he lived, so that's where the hobgoblin came from. The hob is actually a projection at the back or side of a fireplace on which something can be kept warm. And the hobgoblins that live there are usually described as being about 1 to 2 foot high and dressed in brown clothes. These are another group of fairies that's not harmful at all to humans. They're not even very noxious. They're usually pretty good. In the 17 and 1800s, like the Brownies, the hobgoblins lived in houses long enough that the houses were named for the hobgoblins. And the individual names of the goblins have come down to us. Some of the names that have come down is Hobgob, Tom Tit, Robin Roundcap, Hob Thresh Hob, and Goblin Groom. But lately, in the early part of the 1900s, late part of the 1800s, the sightings of sighting of hobgoblins have got a lot rarer. So people think that there was just finally too many people in England and the hobgoblins went someplace else. Our next fairy is another one of the mean ones, Jenny Greenteeth is, as they still see descriptions of her in modern times, a river hag that pulls children into the river to drown them. Tales of her are from Lancashire, Cheshire, Shropshire, and it's all in northwest England. She's often described as green skin with long hair, sharp teeth. Modern folklore theorists say that she was developed to keep the kids away from the rivers. Fairly common, you don't want them down there, you're going to tell them that she's going to drown. It's interesting to see that the name Jenny Greenteeth is used to describe one type of pondweed that covers the surface of small ponds. And that might be where the origin of the common name for the water plant came from, is from the folklore. Next we have another water fairy. This is Peg Prowler. She was found along the River Tees, again in the north of England. The River Tees is the largest river in England, if I remember correctly. It goes all the way across England and it wanders a lot. This picture shows her with blue skin, but most of the reports actually show her as green skin. It said that like Jenny Greenteeth, she'd catch the ankles of those who wandered too close to the river and then pull them down to their death. The next one is another one that everybody recognizes from fantasy, and that's the Pixies. Usually found in the southwest part of England around Cornwall. They're usually seen as good-hearted creatures with a love of good pranks. In most of the stories, they're not trying to kill any of the humans, just bother them greatly. They respond better with children and older people than with mature children, or than they do with the teens or mature people. A lot of times, for teens especially, there's stories of them coming upon a pixie or a group of pixies. And the pixies will lead them out into the woods and the fields and lose them. Pixies are usually described as old men, wrinkled skin, red hair, usually less than a foot in height, and usually depicted as dressing in earth tone colors, especially green, or using natural material like moss, grass, and lichens. In a lot of the wilder areas around Cornwall, there's a lot of standing stones. And it says that the pixies inhabit many of those standing stones. Next we come to the Portunes. Now the Portunes are an interesting type of fairy. And usually they're not too bad, they're very industrious fairy. It's said that most of the farms had a group or a family of Portunes living on them, and they help get the crops in. They take and make sure that the animals have food where they can reach it if somebody's away for a while. But it says they do have one annoying habit. In the book, The Fairy Mythology by Thomas Knightley, from 1870, he says that out in the fields, when in the uncertain shades of night, the English are riding anywhere alone, the Portune sometime invisibly joins the horseman. And when he has accompanied him a great while, he at last takes the reins and leads the horse into a neighboring slough. And when he is fixed and floundering in it, the Portune hops off with a loud laugh, and by sport of this sort, he mocks the simplicity of mankind. And then he continues on and says, it is their nature to embrace the simple life of comfortable farmers, and when on account of their domestic work they are sitting up at night, when the doors are shut, they warm themselves by the fire and take little frogs out of their bosom, roast them on the coals, and eat them. So, not too bad a fairy to have around. The next fairy is the thrumming cap. Now, this is an interesting name, and the thrumming caps actually work to keep the wool in the northern parts of England, around Northumberland especially, of high quality. It's said that they wore the caps made as thrums. Thrums was another interesting word and one I had to look up. The definition is that it's the excess wool clipped off when the weaving is done. So as you spin the wheel down and you get down and you clip that last little bit off, that was the thrum. Now wasn't able to find any pictures of the thrumming cap, so I did find a picture of a nice mitten that was made there, and then my granddaughter Rhiannon, that did all the illustrations in the book, did the picture on the left. Moving on, we come to the Will-o'-the-Wisps. The Will-o'-the-Wisp is in every one of the countries in the British Isles, and you can see it over here in the United States. They're usually described where you'd be out in the countryside, out on the moors, and you'd see glowing lights that seem to be dancing and moving through the grass. As you go to find out what it is, they seem to just drift off a little bit at a time, so they always keep ahead of you. And they really don't want to hurt anybody. They just like to take people off and get them lost. That's a common trait. As you can see here, there are a lot of regional names for these, and it's all over the place. And you'll see them in each of the different countries that I talk about. One of the references that's talked about in some of the tales is that when you see a will-o'-the-wisp, something bad is going to happen in the area. It might not be a death. There are some fairies that portend death, but it's just something bad's going to happen. Some kind of problem is going to be in that area. And next we finish up England with the Spriggans. The Spriggans are another type of fairy that lives in the Cornwall area. They're like the Pixies, but the Spriggans are more spiteful. Where the Pixies were just trying to bother people, the Spriggans will actually hurt people if they can. It's said that the Spriggans haunted the lonely places such as ruined castles, barrows, certain standing stones, and the windswept crags overlooking the downs. They're thought to be the source of misfortunes such as blighted crops, bad weather, and illness, especially in a time when people didn't understand the real causes for the illnesses. It's said that they want to steal small children and replace them with their own kind. And if you've seen the movie Labyrinth, the Spriggans are the one that took the babies for the fairy king. Usually described like the one on the left, where it's grotesque, ugly, and crooked, skinny bodies. Not pretty to look at. So next we'll move on to Ireland. And again, the map is just for reference. And we'll start with the Banshee. Now, the term Banshee comes from the Old Irish, Banshee, which simply means woman of the She or woman of the fairies. Usually seen as an omen of death. Many of the families have a Banshee that is associated with their family. And it's said that even if a member of the family comes to the United States and is going to die, the Banshee back in Ireland will still cry, will still call. Banshees are usually described as dressed in white or gray, and usually having long, fair hair. Sometimes seen with a gray cloak. Our next family, our fairy, is the Bantee. Bantee is a fairy housekeeper. And they were believed to look like old women dressed in old-fashioned peasant clothes, and would finish up any cleaning you didn't get done at night. So they were helpful. Yes, Bantees are helpful. They were also said to look over or look after the house when people were away. Very friendly to humans, and their main wish was to have a friendly human house they could watch over. It's believed that they would look after the children in the house and take care of them and keep away bad dreams. So this is really a good fairy to have around. Their favorite offering was fresh strawberries and cream. So they said if you did this every night and put out cream and strawberries for the for the Bantee, they'd always keep your home nice and well taken care of. Next we come to another scary fairy, the Dullahan. The Dullahan is described in two different ways. Some of the stories describe it as riding a black horse, sometimes headless, like this one is on the left. and usually carrying their head under the arm. And it's interesting that in all of those tales, they're described as having no sound at all when a Dullahan passes. Other ones, sorry. In other ones, they're described as driving a black carriage, again with no head. Now, it's thought the Dullahan's job is to take the people to the other world. And it was very bad luck to see a Dullahan. But if you wanted to call upon a gatekeeper from the fair folk, the Dullahan is a good gatekeeper because their job is to act as a psycho-con and take the souls to the underworld. I haven't seen any rituals where they've called in a nature spirit for gatekeeper, but it's possible. It's said that if you see a Dullahan, it's bad luck. It's said that if the Dullahan stops riding, then it's even worse luck, because that means you're the next one he's going to come and get. And he's stopping to see where you are and see what you look like. So you really don't want to associate with him too much. Next we come to the Fear Gorka. Fear Gorka means red man. It was, and in some states he still is, because this is another one that people talk about seeing in modern times. Say he's the practical joker of the Fear Gorka. He usually dresses in red, and he's played many tricks on unsuspecting mortals. He usually is seen alone, one of the solitary fairies. And sometimes he would come in to warm himself by a person's fire, and if the person didn't raise any objections to him being there, then their household would prosper. But if you did say anything against him or ask him to leave, then you'd have nothing but bad luck. Next is another. This is the Fear Gorka. The Fear Gorka means hungry grass. Now the stories about the Fear Gorka started around the Great Famine in '48. And if you want to talk about the famine, I'll talk about that later, because I got lots of things to say about the famine. But stories at that time talk about areas of the land where they were bewitched. It said that if you stopped on that piece of the land or traveled over it, that you'd suffer uncontrollable pangs of hunger. And if nothing happened to help you, then you'd die. So Irish peasants took to taking and sprinkling leftover crumbs along the grass as they walked, just to starve off this. The hunger is generally seen as a warning of the fairies, because the people were moving away and leaving them. They didn't like that. The first tale I found was by William Carlton in the Dublin University magazine from April of 1856. It was called The Fear Gorka, or The Hungry Grass. There's also a Fear Gorka, which is the hungry man, and that's who's pictured here. The Fear Gorka would appear as a traveling merchant, said to be a really gaunt figure, cadaver type looks, miserably clad, and that if people gave him money or gave him things, he'd be nice and leave them alone. If they refused to, they were going to soon be reduced to poverty themselves or die. So those days in Ireland, you had to be careful who you talked to on the roads. Our next fairy is Ganconic. The Ganconic's a little pixie-like fairy, like the one shown on the right here. Usually big eyes, curved upwards on the end, large rounded ears. They were depicted as being very small, no more than a couple inches, or like a Disney-esque fairy. They were somewhat mischievous. They said they had wings, but the wings didn't work. They couldn't fly. And they might be mistaken for flickering lights or lightning bugs. Now, there's other tales that describes the Ganconic as the love talker. It said that he strolls around the countryside with his hands in his pocket and his short Irish pipe, the dudeen, in his mouth, as depicted here on the left. It's said that he lazily strolls around in the lonely valleys, and he makes love to the foolish maidens, and goes gostering with the idle boys. This was another word I didn't know what it meant, and I had to go look it up. But actually, all gostering means is to have boastful talk. So he'd go out and have fun in the countryside. It's said to meet him was bad luck, and whoever was ruined by ill-judged luck was said to have been with the Grand Conic. Our next fairy is the Leprechaun. Everybody, I'm sure, knows about leprechauns and leprechaun tales, and how he's the shoemaker, and how he'll give you a big pot of gold that he keeps hidden if you can catch him. And most people know that the secret to catching the leprechaun when you see him is to never take your eyes off him. If you blink for a second, he's gone. Sounds almost like weeping angels. Most of the stories, the leprechauns are depicted as generally harmless creatures. They enjoy their solitude. They want to live out in remote locations. They don't want to come and be bothered by people. Although if you listen to the Disney features like Darby O'Gill and Little People, the leprechauns are in the houses of the old areas of Ireland. And most of the tales end in the leprechauns outwitting the humans. There's very few actual tales that has the human winning. Our next fairy is the Luantashi. Luantashi are the guardians of the blackthorns. So they won't allow a blackthorn stick to be cut down on either Beltane or Samhain. And should any person manage to cut a stick on those days, they're going to come after him and some misfortune is going to come to them. Described as weazened old man, pointed heads, long teeth, long arms and fingers. It's said that they only leave their blackthorn trees to dance in the moonlight. Our next one is the Pest. Now the Pest are rather like Nessies. They're a water fairy that lives in the lakes. They've been sighted in modern times around Roscommon right up until the 21st century. So, again, they're real hard to find though, as most of the Nessies or Champ or any of the other water creatures are. They're described as looking like giant eels, at least 7 yards long, with thick bodies and a head with a mane on it like a horse. And it's said in the legends that they guard a treasure at the bottom of the lakes. Our next one is another one I'm sure everybody's going to recognize, the Pooka. There are lots of stories about the Pooka that have been brought forward into modern fantasy and on television. It's a lot of different regional variations to name. Yeah, here's all of the names that you could see up here, all meaning the same thing. Pooka's a water fairy. It's a great shapeshifter. Can be found in the shape of a dog, a horse, a bull, a goat, and even in one of the tales it's a rabbit. And of course in the movie Harvey, you have a giant rabbit that's a Pooka. The common thread for all of them is it's usually dark or very black. It commonly takes the form of a sleek black horse. And it's said that if you could get on the Pooka's back, it's going to take you for a wild ride. Now, usually the Pooka won't do any harm to a rider. And when we get to Scotland, we'll talk about the Kelpie, which is a similar type of fairy, but the Kelpie wants to drown you. It's said that the Pooka can talk, and has been known to give good advice and to keep people away from danger. It's said that Samhain, the day of Samhain, is the Pooka's day. And it's the one time of the year when if you see a Pooka, it's going to be nice to you. It's not going to try to hurt you. The next one is another common one, the Roans. Now, the Roans are the seal people of Ireland, and they're like the Selkies of Scotland. They shed their skin and look. Women are renowned for their big brown eyes. There are literally hundreds of tales along all the coast about the Browns. Now, there was a movie that came out back in the 70s called The Secret of Brownish. That's a great movie. It really describes the Browns well. There's supposed to be another one that came out last summer called Song of the Sea. It's about the children of a lighthouse keeper who find a Roan, or a Selkie in that case. The next one we have the Sea Maidens. Again, these are the mermaid types. They are found in the ocean. They're the Magdamaran, and you'll find many, many tales along the coast of sea maidens as well. Mermaids were common all around the British Isles. They're noted for foretelling disaster or starting disasters. If people have been batted on, they'll bring disasters down with great storms. There's actually a story about St. Patrick, who said that while he was in Ireland, he met with one of the Magdamaran. And he was warning the mermaid not to lead ships into their doom, and she didn't want to hear that. She said if they're in her land, they're her ships. All right. The last one from Ireland is the Watershed. Now, the Watershed is a lot like the Willothewisp, only instead of being on the moors and in the land, they're up near the bogs or the lakes. Sometimes people say that as you're in here, like these pictures show, it's a lake bobbing up and down on the surface of the lake itself. So it's not that they're trying to get people out to them, because most people won't go out in the lake to check a light. But they're just there. That's where they live. Another name for them was the jack-o'-lanterns. Where are we? Now we're at 51 minutes. All right. So the next, we're moving to the Isle of Man. Again, this is what man looks like, if you're not familiar with it. And the first one we'll talk to is the Aheens. The Aheen simply means themselves in Max Gaelic. So in other words, it's might very well be one of the euphemisms of the people in the area. They were also known as the Clon Manoia. That means children of pride. And it's said that these are the main race of the trooping fairies on the island. I talked before about solitary fairies that like to stay off by themselves. And there's other races of fairies that are the trooping fairies that like to gather in large groups and progress through the country, or progress to another fairy's area and fight them. And there's a lot of stories about trooping fairies. It's said that the Aheen would be benevolent, but they're mischievous sometimes. They took babies when they wanted to, and they were about the size of a small child themselves when they were visible. But most of the time, they were invisible. Many of the fairies had the ability to remain invisible. It said they fished at sea and they herded cattle on the hills. And the Manx people knew that there would be good fishing and harvest when they heard the fairies making storage barrels in their caves. Our next fairy is the Bugain. Although that picture really doesn't show it. The Bugain was the most dangerous and terrifying of all the Manx fairies. It's said to be an evil hobgoblin. It's said to be covered in black hair, have a large red mouth with tusk, and they were known or said to tunnel underground like giant moles. And if they come up and catch humans, they drag them back underground with them. It said that a Bugain usually had a particular home, like a waterfall or a specific forest or an old standing stone set. The most famous of all is associated with the church in St. Trian's, and it's on the main road between Peel and Douglas. It's said that something happened And the Bugain didn't like the church being there, so it ripped off the roof. And when the people put a new roof back on, it would rip that off. So it's said that they've never been able to have a roof on that church, and it's now known as the roofless church. The next fairy is the Kuthak. The Kuthak is a fairy that haunts caves. It might be a relative of the Bugain because it lives underground, but it's not harmful at all. And it's said that their voice is described as sounding like the waves of the sea, but they were like the knockers, the beings that lived in the caves and would help the miners. Our next is the opposite of the mermaid. This is the merman, and that's the Denny Mara. Denny Mara simply means man of the sea in Manx. He's regarded as friendlier to humans than his counterparts in England, but the legend of not whistling on a ship came from interactions with the Denny Mara. It said that he didn't like whistling, and if anybody was whistling on a ship, he would bring the ship to misfortune. So that's where that came from. And you'll hear that even today in many areas, that it's ill, or that it's bad luck to whistle on a ship. There's one interesting story that with the Denny Mara, if you're good to him, he'll be good to you. So these 7 brothers went out as fishermen, and every time they got a large group of fish, they'd leave offerings to the Denny Mara. So he liked that. So they kept bringing back larger and larger offerings of herring, and then the other fishermen became jealous. So eventually the harbor master told them to take out the other fishermen with them and show them where they were getting all of these big catches. So they took the people out, didn't want to give away their fishing grounds, but they took the people out, and during the night, the fishermen heard the Denny Mara say, "It is fine and calm now, but a storm is coming." So they hurried right back to harbor and didn't tell the other fishermen, and the other fishermen fishing boats were all lost. Another scary one is the Dúni Oi. He's a benign spirit usually, and his job is to warn people about impending storms. Living on a small island like the Isle of Man, storms are very important to him. A storm could go across Man really quick and cause a lot of problems. And the Dúni Oi would shout a warning, and he'd speak while making a misty appearance, so you could just barely see a figure there and you'd hear the shouting. And whenever he called, the farmers were warned to herd in their cattle and sheep and put them in shelter. Now there's another Manx fairy, the Howla, which is actually what that picture is. And the only difference is that Dúni Oi speaks and talks, and the Howla only howls. Our next fairy is the Friesian. The Friesian is the solitary fairy that helps out around the farms. It means harvester in Manx. That's one interesting thing. Most of the fairies in Manx, their names are descriptive of what they do. Some of the tales talk about farmers that didn't want their help because even though they're helpful and they try to do good, they're not too smart. And a lot of times they do things that really weren't helpful. It's said that the Friesian didn't like the cold and usually didn't see them during the warm months, or the winter months. It doesn't say where they went, but they didn't like the cold. Next we come to the Foers. The Foers were the giants in Manx tradition. And it's said that they were nice, as giants go. They didn't usually hurt people. They'd come down every once in a while and steal cattle to eat. And as long as they were left alone, they wouldn't bother people. But if people started getting together in a group to go up on the hills because they were stealing too many cattle, then they'd find mysterious rocks were falling out of the sky on their homes. Next is the Galatian. The Galatian's a gray-haired fairy that lives on farms and helps at night. It said that they'd help thresh the corn, find lost sheep, and return them to the burns. And many times they were simply sighted just sitting on the hillside watching the farms to see if anything needs to be done. The Galatian is one that there are modern stories around from the late 20th century, early 21st century that shows that they're here. Nowadays, though, there's not as many farms to help out with, so they've taken to activities that are a little more mischievous. It's said that they find large magnetic stones and use that to pull the cars off the roads and into ditches. I was reading that story and I was thinking, maybe it's late at night and the people have had a little bit too much to drink, so they need an excuse why they ended up in a ditch. That might be what happens.
It's just all iron in the Guinness they've been drinking.
Yeah. All right. Next, we have the Galatian. The Galatian's Manx water bulls, like the Kelpie in Scotland or the Pooka in Ireland. It's a shapeshifter, seen as a small lamb or a small pony or a young horse. Usually while the Kelpie and the Pooka appear as large, full-grown animals, this one is usually very small. But it is another dangerous fairy, and it's said that its favorite pastime from the tales is catching women alone by the waterside and raping them. So not a nice one to have around. Next, Liana She. The Liana She, rather, is said to be a vampire fairy. Now, I don't know if the legends of vampires today came from early legends of this type of fairy or vice versa. But anyways, it's said that the Liana She in the tales would attach themselves to one man, and to that one man she would appear irresistibly beautiful. And she was also supposed to be invisible to everybody else. So what would happen is, after the man went with her, he was ruined body and soul. He would stay and do nothing but think of her and just waste away as she depleted all his energy. And Liana She actually means fairy sweetheart. There's a very famous one that is associated with the Fletchers. And she was the Liana She of Ball Fletcher. And it said that she gave them a fairy cup at one time to one of her lovers, and that they still have it in the family, and it's used, every member of the family drinks from it each Christmas as a remembrance of her. And by doing that, then she leaves the family alone. The next one is another scary looking picture, but it's really interesting. It's a fairy dog. It's found in one specific location. It's called, the Mendendu rather, is found in Peel Castle. He's described as being a spectral hound, and his legend goes back to a time when the castle was a fortress with a garrison of soldiers. It said that this dog was well known to the soldiers, and it was thought that he was capable of terrifying people to death. And it's interesting that on Good Morning America a few weeks ago, that a spectral dog is showing up in that exact area on the Isle of Man right now. It's said to have scared people to death. So maybe he's still there. And we'll finish up the Isle of Man with the Fenedry. He's another house fairy, farm fairy, like a brownie, hard-working but bad-tempered. He said he'll help a farmer with chores, and is like a large, hairy, shaggy elf. This is another one where if you offer him clothes or offer him payment, he'll disappear just like a brownie would, or house elf. Then we go over to Scotland. And Scotland's that nice area north of England with all the highlands and uplands and the islands out there. We'll start out with the Calish Bear. The Calic Bear. She's known as the Blue Hag, or the Old Wife. She's the goddess who brings the winter to the land. It's said that she's born every Samhain and dies every Beltane. And a lot of stories will tell how that her and Bridget alternate, where Bridget is resting during the winter when the Calic is out, and then vice versa, they change around. Although in other stories, Black Annis in England is said to be an aspect of her, as the summer aspect of her. She's said to carry a staff that freezes the ground with every tap it makes, or sacred trees for holly and gorse bush. And a lot of people nowadays call upon her. Next, we have the Ghillie Dhu. The Ghillie Dhu are the Scotch fairies that live out in the countryside and are the tree guardians. And they, just like humans, jealously guard their trees. It's said that they were once seen all over Scotland. It didn't take much to see them, but they aren't seen too often anymore. They're said to be about 7 inches tall, and their clothing is made from leaves and moss and grass. And it's a very shy creature that don't want to be seen. They live on berries and nuts and create a warm, round nest from plant fibers. Now, in modern time, the Ghillie has been taken over by snipers. The suit on the right is a Ghillie suit, and that's what's used by people to hide when they're hunting. Next, we have the Green Woman. The Green Woman's located up in Lorry 5th. That's the upper northeast section of Scotland. And it's said that she'd visit cottages at night and steal children. Again, many folklorists believe that her legend was created to explain sudden infant death syndrome. When you don't know what's causing something, you come up with a good reason for it. And having a fairy that visited at night to take the children is a good way to do it. There's not much descriptions of her, just that she's always wore green and didn't bother anybody except the babies, and she would take their souls away. Our next is the Guy Carlin. Now, the Guy Carlin is actually an individual, not a race of or type of fairies. And this is in Fife area of Scotland. It's in the Middle Eastern section. And the Guy Carlin is supposed to be the queen of the fairies in that area. It's said that she's very beautiful and she interacts well with the humans in the area. And it was also a pretty picture, so I couldn't pass the picture by. And then we get to the Kelpie. As I said, the Kelpie is the one that's not nice. It's the Scottish water fairy, usually seen in the shape of a beautiful horse. Sometimes it will give the person that mounts it a dunking, but a lot of times it's going to try to do more than that. There's a really interesting story. It's a common Scottish tale. It's told in a lot of different areas about 9 children that were lured onto a Kelpie's back. But they said there was also a 10th child that didn't want to get on the back. So the Kelpie chased him and tried to catch him, but he escaped. And it said that he escaped after the Kelpie had bit his finger. And when they found him, his finger was gone. The thing I forgot to mention is that when a child or a person gets on a Kelpie's back, he's stuck to it. He can't get off. So that's why the 10th child wanted to run away. It also says that the Kelpie will draw the person underground and drown them and eat them, except for the heart and liver. And I doubt if they found hearts and livers floating on the top of the sea, but that was the tale. Then we go to the Headless Trunk. This is on the Isle of Skye. That's the largest and most northerly island in the Inner Hebrides. It's on the northwest side. That's west side. It's called the Headless Trunk, and it's supposed to be a large headless monster. And he only murders men, never women and kids. This one doesn't carry its head along with it, though. And then we come to another nice fairy. This is the Lorry. The Lorry is the patroness of spinners. It's said that she appears as an old woman. She's usually wearing white and is an expert at spinning and more than willing to punish anybody that's lax at their spinning or careless about it. She loves music and will cause mischief to anyone singing off key. Nice. Written by her is said to keep ailments away from the wearer. Then we have another beast, is the Nuckalevy, and this is another one not nice. These are the Scottish sea fairies. It's said that they're ill-tempered, hideous appearance, and extremely malevolent toward humans. They take on any appearance they want, but their natural appearance is that of half man, half horse. And people would say you could always tell if one was coming close because of the smell they emit, which is like rotten eggs. Another one is a sulig. Slua. There we go. I'll get it right. Slua is known as the host of the unforgiven or restless dead. And this is another one of the trooping type fairies that don't get along good with humans. Some of the stories are old enough that folklorists think they might be references to an old race of people, the Picts, that lived in Scotland, that are no longer there. That's a possibility. These are generally thought of as generally evil. They're not welcome into heaven, hell, or in the pagan otherworld, so that's why they're off on their own. They usually said to fly in groups like flocks of birds, usually coming from the west, and were known to try to enter the house of a dying person in an effort to carry their souls away. Next is the other nice pretty ones, and this is the Selkies, the seal people of Scotland. They would come up on shore, shed their seal skin. The picture on the right is perfect for it. Shed the skin and become a human. There's many stories of fishermen that would take them to wife. They'd live happily for a while, and then as soon as they wanted to, they'd find their skin and leave. And there's also stories of fishermen that would hide the skin so they couldn't get back to them, and it would take them a long time before they could find them and get back to the sea. And then we come to the Trolls. The Trolls are a small troll-like fairy creature. Sounds very much like trolls, which a lot of the terms they're doing. Generally inclined to be short in stature, ugly, and shy and mischievous. And like the trolls of Scandinavia, they would mainly be nocturnal creatures. They live during the day in trowy knolls, and there are earthen mounds. Traditionally, the Trolls have a fondness for music, and the folktale tells of their habit of kidnapping musicians and taking them back into their den underground. Next, we have the Ersk. It's a lowland Scots fairy. It's a type of brownie. It's a solitary fairy that lives near pools of water, said to be extremely lonely and to try to find friendship among humans, but because of their appearance, people run away from them. A sad one. And to finish Scotland, we'll come over here to the Wilkie. This is back in the Orkneys. Little is known about the fairy, other than we have one letter written in 1833 by a Mr. J. Patterson, and in it he said, "Wilkie was a creature after whom two burial mounds in Westray, Wilkie's Nose, were named." He continued that there was a tradition prevalent that all the natives of Westray were in the habit of dedicating to him daily a certain portion of milk. The milk was poured into a hole in the center of one of the termuli. He goes on to say that if the offerings were neglected, goods might disappear or be stolen, livestock would sicken, or houses would be haunted by him. And then he adds that the natives still seem much afraid of Wilkie's influence, although they no longer dedicate to him oblations of milk. It is customary for the natives to frighten their children to silence by telling them the Wilkie's coming. Now, pouring milk down into a hole in the mound sounds an awful lot like sharing a feast with the graves of ancestors. So this could be what it was referring to, and the Wilkie was actually a form of ancestor worship.
Yeah.
And then we come to Wales. Wales is another nice part in the bottom left side of England. And our first one is the Afang. Now the Afang is really a dragon type fairy. It was said to live on the bottom of a large bog, said to have ironclad back, long tail that could wrap itself around a mountain, so it was a large dragon. 4 large front legs, big knees that bent up like a grasshopper's, but they were covered with scales like armor. And the scales were hard as steel and bulged out at the thighs. Now, not much could be done about the Avang, but one tale tells how he was captured by a young, beautiful girl whose perfume caused him to fall in love with her, and after that, obviously, people came and killed him. So, bad tale for the dragon. Now, the next one is the Bendithimam. For the Welsh stuff, I had to have Kirk help me. I had to have him write out the phonetics for it, because there was no way in hell I would ever pronounce these. So these are the phonetics from Kirk that I'm using. It simply means the mother's blessings in Welsh. And some people say that this is just another euphemism for the Welsh fairies. The main description of them is that they're short, ugly, with long, misshapen, withered limbs. It's also said that they have long, unkempt hair that hangs in bunches and only covers part of their heads. Pretty ugly like that. Their children are called Grimbles and are said to be extremely ugly. And they want to steal human babies and leave their own children in place. It's said they want to improve themselves. There are a lot of ways described to get the kids back. None of them are nice. It starts out by taking the baby that was left in the place and placing it in the middle of a fire, or ripping its feet off with tongs. Not nice stuff. Not nice stuff at all. It is said, though, that the children that were taken, the ones that were returned, always talked about what a nice time they had and how they wished they would be back with the fairies. Our next one is the Pooka. Pooka is known for helping with the churning of the butter, but they would only help with churning the butter if the fireplace was kept clean and if a bowl of cream was left out for them each night. And it's said that if the Pooka wasn't happy with the family, then it would throw things, bang about, and make noises at night, and tell the family secrets to the other people in the village. One of the tales that I thought fairly funny is it seems that a maid living with a family didn't like the Pooka. The Pooka scared her. So instead of leaving out a bowl of cream for it one night, she left out a bowl of urine.
Oh!
Obviously, the Pooka wasn't happy and left, and they said that the people's in the house reputation was destroyed because the Pooka spread the tale of what they'd done far and wide through the countryside. The next is the Bucoid. It's a solitary fairy who's said to be small, about a foot high, with purple eyes and a long pointed nose. It's said that he moves very fast, so fast that people can't see other than just a blur. And he loves to warm himself at a hearth, but he'll turn nasty if people try to keep him away from the fire. Our next fairy is the Bugan, if you're referring just to one, or the Baganad, if you're referring to more than one. And these are the Welsh goblins. It's said that they live in the countryside and frighten travelers if they were out late at night, like other goblins. And people will report hearing the noise of work coming from bottoms of the ponds, or the voices of children crying out from the depth of those ponds. But nobody could ever find them. The goblins were good hiders. They were all of them. All right, this one is the Kobulna. Kobulna are the Welsh mine spirits, similar to the Cornish knockers or the German kobolds. These are good fairies, and they help the miners find the different minerals they're looking for. It's said that the Kobulna, dressed in miners' attire, were ugly to look at and stood about 18 inches in height. And we're also told that they were very good-natured and were helped miners in any way they could, as long as the miners didn't make fun of them. Our next one is the Cuhuthra, and she's the Welsh version of the Banshee. It said that she would start her keening, which is a groaning instead of a wailing, to foretell the death or multiple deaths that would be caused by an epidemic or an accident. According to one person who heard it, it sounds like the groaning of a sick person who is about to die. He went on to say that it starts in the distance, then comes again closer, and the third time sounding as if it was right next to him and was lowered in volume to that of a softly crying woman. One of them in particular is said to haunt Pennard Castle on the very banks of the River Dibble. That was one specifically located with that family. And the next one is the Welsh version of the English Will-o'-the-Wisp, and it's Lylythus. It's that L-L-Y-L-L. And it's it's a common phenomenon in many parts of Wales. It's believed they lie in wait for unwary travelers to lead them into the bogs. And as with the will-o'-the-wisp, nowadays people think that it's all some form of methane or swamp gas. Could be. And we have another hard one to pronounce. This fairy is the Illith, if you're referring to one, or Lylythan, if you're referring to more than one. And this is the one that looks the most like the Disney ideal of a fairy that I could find in any of the tales. It's supposed to be small, with wings like Tinkerbell, said to live in the woods and the glens that are still wild. Usual food is toadstool or fairy butter, and that's a fungus-like substance found in limestone crevices. And there's a story told about the Lylythan that they could work magic. In it we found Rowley Pugh, who is a poor farmer who feels himself cursed by misfortune. Other farmers flourish while his crops fail and his cattle grow thin. And even his wife Katie is sickly. So an Illith offers to have his people help him, but only if the farmer will leave a candle burning in the night and have his wife sweep the fire clean. So the farmer did this, and the fairy made good on the promise. Each night as Rowley and Katie go to bed, they hear the Lylythan at their merry work. Each morning the household is in good order, and this continues for 3 years. Their crops grew well, the cattle grew fat, Rowley and Katie became healthier and stronger, and then one night Katie became curious to see them at their high-spirited work. So she tiptoed downstairs to the kitchen, and their infectious good humor at the work set her to laughing, and she blew out the candle. And that, obviously, as in these stories, was the last time they ever saw them. So. But Rowley and Katie did retain their good health, and they prospered from everything that had been done. Next, we come to the Gregad Anun. These are similar to the English Lady of the Lake type fairies. They're described as being beautiful maidens with long golden hair, said to be gentle, and live harmoniously with the families around the lakes. Tales are told of some of the lakes in Wales that entire towns were once submerged. Sounds almost like the land of Yis out in the channels. The tales are told of some of the lakes where at certain times you can see the fairy castles under the water and hear the fairy bells ringing. For the next one, the Lylythan, they're frightening female fairies, and they haunt the lonely roads in the Welsh mountains. The Welsh word Gwyleth is variously used to signify gloom, shade, darkness, a hag, a witch, a fairy, or a goblin. But its special application to these mountains is to these mountains as places of gloom and harmful habitats. Another name for them is the old woman of the mountain. One description said that she looked like a poor old woman with an oblong, four-cornered hat, ash-colored clothes, her apron thrown across her shoulder, with a pot or wooden can in her hand, such as poor people carry to fetch milk, and that she was always going along before the spectator and sometimes crying boob, which is the Welsh cry of distress. It's said that anyone who saw her, either by night or on a misty day, would be sure to lose their way. And usually they would try to avoid her if they could. If they'd hear noise ahead of them, hear her crying, they'd try to avoid Coming up to our next one, this is another Rumpelstiltskin spinner version. This is the Ghillie Verruthen, and she's the Welsh female version of Rumpelstiltskin. There's a story about her coming upon a woman who didn't have time to finish her spinning, so she promised to do the work and return it to the woman, only if the woman could remember her name in 3 days' time. Well, as the story goes, as soon as the fairy left, the woman forgot her name. So in a panic, she set about searching for it and finally found her singing as she worked. And like the Rumpelstiltskin story, the fairy revealed her name in the song, and the woman was able to state it when she found her, came back. And for our last one from Wales, we have the Toleth. Toleth is a ghost-like creature that's only appeared to one sense at a time. So in other words, you could see it, but not hear it. Or you could hear it, but not see it. And as a rule, the Toleth is described as rapping or knocking or heavy thuds. And sometimes it sounded like the shuffling and trampling of many feet or the noise of many people bearing a heavy burden. One tale comes from South Wales, and it says, a tailor said he always knew when a customer was going to die by the sounds he heard. One day he was repairing the breeches of a huntsman, and presently he heard a mysterious rapping or tapping on his work table. As he set the breeches aside for a few minutes while threading the needle or cutting a piece of cloth, the sound ceased. But when he took up the work again, the rapping and tapping was resumed. In that way, he was able to foretell the death in the parish. So this is the last of the fairies from Wales. And we had talked about drawing a brownie into the house. It's a good thing to have brownies in the house. I have this spell written into the Solitary Druid book. You can find it there. But what the spell is this. And there's some beginning work that needs to be done. The first thing you have to do is you have to prepare your house to have the brownie come into it. A good way to do that is by finding a special stone. If you can find one with a hole in it, that's even better. You want to wash the hole thoroughly, or the stone thoroughly. And if you have a fireplace, clean the fireplace and lay a new fire. If you don't have a fire, try to clear a place out next to the stove for the stone and clean your stove. In the evening when the family is gathered, put the rock on a hearth and then put flowers around it. Set a cup or plate filled with an offering near it, and offerings that work well are milk, cider, food, or whiskey. But again, only in small amounts. You don't want that drunken spirit in your house. And then you say something like this. This one here actually comes from Diana Paxson. She gave it to me up at Witching Fest one year. And then after you've said the charm, light the fire and burn some sweet-smelling incense on it. Leave the offering in place overnight, and in the morning burn whatever is left. And then make offerings to the house elf whenever there's a family gathering, or if you need to get a lost object returned. As we said, the fairies will take away your keys, but they'll also bring them back if you're nice to them. When you're getting ready to do spring cleaning, make sure you let the house spirit know in advance, and then give their stone a good washing too. But you have to let them know in advance. If you don't let the spirit know in advance, you might well end up having it mad at you, and you don't want to, and you will find your house without a spirit. It's also a good idea that if you're going to be away for a while on vacation, you have somebody that will come in and leave an offering for the fairy, or let the fairy know you're going to be gone for 2 weeks. You know, as long as they know in advance, it's usually pretty good. But I'll leave that there so you can take time to write it up. And we still got about 15 minutes, right, Rob? Yeah. Okay. So one of the things in ADF, we talked for a long time about including the fair folk, the fairies, as part of our nature spirits workings. And some people didn't think we'd find fairies here. But if you look at the time of the famine, the potato famine, in 1850, 26% of the population of New York City was Irish. That's how many came over, and they spread out. And you have to consider trooping fairies in Ireland. We know that one of the things they did was travel with families. We know that there were particular fairies in the British Isles that would stay with the family. So there's no reason to think that the fairies wouldn't also come with the Irish or the other people that came over to the United States. As these people spread out, they brought the fairies with them. Now, what we also found out through experimentation is that in some areas the fairies fought with the local Native American fairies and lost. And the way that came about is Shining Lake was calling upon the Irish fairies in their rituals when they first started out. This is in Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And they were getting terrible omens. So the members of the inner core of the group went out and did a lot of trance work, and they were leaving offerings and talking to the fairies, and found out that the Irish fairies lost in that area. The Native American fairies had won. So they started changing their ritual around and leaving offerings to the Native American fairies and the native tribes. And then their omens started coming good again, and things started working very well. And we've had similar things happen across the United States. Up in the Wisconsin, Minnesota area, the Scandinavian fairies are up there. And if you vary your work to include the ones that won in the areas that you're in, you're going to have a lot better response from the fairies. What else? The last thing I want to talk about is resources. As I said in the beginning, there are many different things on the internet. You can't believe more than a tenth of them. If the information you get comes from a .edu website, odds are it's going to be pretty good. To find out the different types of fairies, what I started out by doing is going to Wikipedia and getting all these lists of different types of fairies from the British Isles. That gave me names. Once I had the names, I went to Google Scholar and plugged those all in to see what kind of academic articles I could find. I live in Syracuse, so we're really lucky in Syracuse that the Onondaga Library, the Syracuse University Library opens up their library to the community, and you have full JSTOR access. So I could go in with a list of what articles I was looking for, download the article from JSTOR, and then have all the information that way. That's a really big help. A lot of the information came from academic articles. And as I said, there's also a lot of books from the late 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s that are out of copyright. And many of those books are at www.sacred-text.com. It's a real good resource. But I try to read a book a day, and I spent probably 2 months going through and doing the research for this book and for these workshops, because there's so much information out of there. And then once you've done all the work, you have to compare all the different stories and put things together to find out what's there. I don't talk about it in here, but there's actually a folklore cataloging system. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, and I should know it. But every type of story is assigned a different classification. And you can,
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's I'm
I don't
blanking
remember
out on
it
it.
off the top of my head either, but
Yeah, but by doing that and comparing the stories of different types, and you can find out actually with any folklore tale what type of story it is. It's been classified. You can see the different similarities and then compare the similarities between the different areas of the British Isles. So there's a lot of work that can be done addressing this as folklore, not just going out like many of the sites you'll find on the internet does and address it as UPG. You know, this fairy came to me and he said, this is what he likes, this is what he wants. It's, you know, UPG can be good at times, very rarely at times, in my opinion. But most of the folklore gathering was done at a time when the people were interacting with the fairies on a daily basis. And I mean that literally. The people would go out and work in the fields, and they'd see the fairies in the field, just as though they were seeing an animal. Yes?
Arn Thompson classification
Yes, thank you.
system.
Arn Thompson.
Arn with two A's.
Yeah, AARNE.
Yep.
Yep. But yeah, there's a lot of stories out there, literally thousands of stories that you can read about the fairies. And these are stories that, you know, they weren't made up in somebody's head. This is what the people saw and told. And it was common for them. So the big question is, why did the fairies leave? Although you still do see some of the stories you'll find in the academic articles are stories that happened in the 1970s, 1980s, especially in the wilder areas of the British Isles. They're still there.
Yeah, I've heard tell of construction projects in the British Isles where the locals will tell you, you can't build there. It won't work.
There's a perfect
That goes right
example
through a
of
ferry
that.
mound. You don't want to do that.
My
When,
understanding is that Iceland still has a government department.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
yes, in
Yes.
Iceland's
Construction
day, you
sites with
can't
land.
disturb fairy knolls. But there's a good story that when John DeLorean went over to Ireland, I believe he went to build his DeLorean plant, they were going and clearing the area, and the workmen told him that there was a fairy tree in the center of the area, and they refused to take it down. So he said that's not acceptable, and he got on the bulldozer and he knocked the fairy tree down. And that's why we no longer see DeLoreans on the road. Yes, it's happening today.
See you beginning of the century.
I just, a couple months ago, I read Eddie Lenahan's book, The Other Crowd. It's all stories that are traditional
Yep.
fairy stories from Ireland. It's really good. That's a really good one too.
There's a lot of books and websites on there, and most of the books are free books. You can go out and just download the electronic copy of it. Any computer nowadays will allow you to read that. It doesn't matter if it's in PDF or Word or whatever. Any of the e-files, even Kindles, you can just read right on your computer nowadays. You don't need to get anything special.
There's an interesting thing happening right now in Dartmoor National Park, which is down in Devon in southwestern England, which is, you probably know, is Brian Froud lives there. Brian Froud has done a lot of work with fairies for decades. But what is happening, it's a national park and has that designation. People are going into the national park and they're constructing and bringing fairy houses and putting them at the base of certain trees. And it started, there were a couple, and then there was a dozen, and then there were 2 dozen. And it's become a real problem for the National Park Authority because they're trying to discourage people going in and scurrying around with leaving things because they're not native to the park, and they're trying to keep the environment pristine. But the people who live in the towns around that area are in the middle of the night going in, and they can't stop it from happening. And there are now hundreds of fairy houses put at the base of the significant trees in Dartmoor National Park.
As the belief in fairies is coming back, you'll find the fairies are coming back.
Brian Froud says that it's because they're having sightings and they're motivated to, kind of like in the movie Close Encounters, where those people were compelled to build this thing because they were having visions and, So you can find this online and see pictures of it. It's pretty amazing.
Well, they have
It is
to,
around
they're here too with us, and if we're in a crisis with the environment, then
They're in a crisis too.
they are too.
Yeah.
So
But that's all I have, so if you want to talk about anything like the potato farm, or potato famine, I can get into that for half an hour or so. People think the potato famine is because of a blight that came over and destroyed the potatoes, and that's all they had to eat in Ireland. Well, that's not even close to being true. What it was is the landowners from England were taking all the rest of the foods, the grains and everything else, and shipping it to the United States to make money.
Rent
Right.
payments.
Yeah, the landowners. So
Yeah.
there was enough food there to support the Irish in Ireland if
If it
they
had
wanted to
gotten
stay,
shipped off.
They were
but
gonna
they
say,
couldn't
they were
have
selling
it
enough
because
food
they were selling.
overseas to feed the Irish.
And what really grinds my gears is when aid societies were trying to get aid in, because Ireland was the only country affected by the potato blight, but Ireland's the only one that had the damn famine.
Yep.
And,
Oh,
and
it's a certain variety of potato
societies,
that's
which,
susceptible to the blight.
some charity societies were trying to get aid into Ireland, and the British government was telling them, no, because you're going to disrupt the free market. The Speaker of Parliament went so far as to read what the hell was his name? Smith. Read the free market guy.
Oh,
Adam Smith.
Read
Yeah.
Adam Smith at them until they went away.
Yeah, no. But that's for another thing. I do have some of my books over here for sale. I have the resource list over here, and I've got more of those. And then I also have handouts for the Great School of Wizardry. The Great School of Wizardry is a school that's been around